The Galactic Academy's main lecture hall buzzed with nervous energy as Professor HFY prepared for the most dangerous demonstration of the semester. The insectoid educator's compound eyes swept across rows of alien students, each representing different worlds and species from across known space. Today's lesson would test everything they had learned about predator-prey dynamics in the galaxy. Today we study the apex predator of Kethmore Prime, Professor HFY announced, his voice carrying through the translation devices worn by every student. The chittering of his mandibles added an ominous undertone to his words. The Shadowstalker has never been successfully contained by any species. It adapts, it learns, and it kills with surgical precision. In the back corner of the lecture hall, Marcus Chen sat quietly among his classmates. The human exchange student had arrived at the academy 3 months ago as part of the first interspecies educational program. Most students still whispered about the strange bipedal creature from the Deathworld called Earth. They had heard stories about his home planet, a world where everything seemed designed to kill its inhabitants, from the weather to the wildlife to the very air they breathed during certain seasons. The Zephyrian students, with their translucent blue skin and delicate features, huddled together near the front. Their homeworld was a peaceful garden planet, where the most dangerous creature was roughly equivalent to what humans might call a butterfly. Behind them sat the Corvin delegation, their rock-like exteriors making them appear more confident, though Marcus had learned that their mineral-based biology made them incredibly slow to react to threats. The Shadowstalker, Professor HFY continued, activating a holographic display, stands 3 meters tall and possesses 6 limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Its camouflage abilities are unmatched, allowing it to become virtually invisible to most sensory organs. It hunts by ambush, striking when prey feels most secure. The hologram showed a creature that looked like nightmare fuel, all teeth, claws, and sinuous movement. Its black hide seemed to absorb light, and even in the holographic representation it was difficult to focus on. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few of the more delicate species made soft sounds of distress. Marcus studied the creature with calm interest. It reminded him of a cross between a panther and a giant mantis, with some cephalopod characteristics thrown in for good measure. Dangerous, certainly, but he had seen worse during his childhood camping trips in the Australian outback. At least this thing was big enough to see coming, unlike some of Earth's more problematic wildlife. The demonstration today will be conducted under strictly controlled conditions, Professor HFY explained as 2 heavily armed security guards took positions near the reinforced containment field generators. The creature will be released into a simulated environment with various prey animals. You will observe its hunting patterns and survival strategies. The lights dimmed as a massive transparent containment chamber rose from the floor in the center of the lecture hall. Inside, a carefully constructed habitat displayed rocks, vegetation, and several small rabbit-like creatures that had been sedated to slow their reactions without eliminating their survival instincts entirely. "Where is the predator?" asked Linara, a Zephyrian student whose voice carried the musical quality of her species. Her large violet eyes scanned the habitat nervously. "Patience," Professor HFY replied. The Shadowstalker was introduced to the environment 6 minutes ago. A collective gasp arose from the students as they realized the creature was already inside, hidden so perfectly that none of them had detected it. Even knowing it was there, Marcus had to focus intently before he spotted the slight distortion near what appeared to be a moss-covered boulder. The first strike came without warning. One moment there were 4 prey animals in the habitat. The next moment there were 3, and a barely visible shadow moved between the artificial trees. The kill had been so quick and silent that most students missed it entirely. "Remarkable," breathed Torgan, a Corvin whose granite-like features somehow managed to convey awe. "I could not detect the attack until it was over." Professor HFY's mandibles clicked approvingly. The Shadowstalker represents the pinnacle of predatory evolution. No known species has successfully developed effective countermeasures against... Actually, Marcus interrupted quietly, raising his hand. There are several ways to counter that hunting strategy. The lecture hall fell silent. Professor HFY's compound eyes fixed on the human student with something approaching disbelief. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Chen?" Marcus stood up, his movement causing a ripple of attention throughout the room. "The creature relies on ambush tactics and camouflage, right?" Those are effective against prey that evolved in environments without similar threats, but there are countermeasures. A few students made sounds that Marcus had learned were the alien equivalent of scoffing. Liseth, an arrogant Altarian whose species considered themselves the galaxy's premier tacticians, spoke up. "Human, you come from a primitive world. What could you possibly know about countering a perfect predator?" Marcus smiled, the expression apparently unsettling several nearby students. "My world produced me, didn't it?" Professor Vexhai tilted his head, mandibles clicking with curiosity. "Explain your reasoning, Mr. Chen." "First, the camouflage relies on visual deception," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "But Earth predators taught my species to use multiple senses. Sound, smell, even changes in air pressure. That thing is big. It has to displace air when it moves." He gestured toward the habitat. "Second, it's an ambush predator, which means it needs to stay relatively stationary to maintain its camouflage. Patient observation and pattern recognition would reveal its position." "Theoretical knowledge," Liseth dismissed with a wave of his four-fingered hand. "The Shadow Stalker has defeated hunting parties from a dozen species." "Maybe," Marcus replied, his tone remaining calm. "But those hunting parties probably thought like prey animals. They were trying to avoid being caught. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense." Professor Vexhai's interest was clearly piqued. "Are you suggesting that your species would hunt the Shadow Stalker?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture foreign but somehow expressive to his alien audience. "Where I come from, if something's hunting you, you hunt it back. Humans didn't become the dominant species on our world by running away from everything that wanted to eat us." The second prey animal disappeared in another lightning-fast strike, but this time Marcus tracked the creature's movement, his eyes following the subtle environmental disturbances that marked its passage. Several students noticed his apparent ability to track the invisible predator and leaned forward in their seats. "Fascinating," Professor Vexhai murmured. "Perhaps we should test this theory more practically." The suggestion sent a chill through the lecture hall that had nothing to do with the environmental controls. The suggestion hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Professor Vexhai's compound eyes remained fixed on Marcus while the rest of the students processed what had just been proposed. The idea of putting a student, even a Deathworlder, into an enclosure with a Shadow Stalker seemed insane to most of the class. "Professor," Linara's musical voice carried a note of alarm, "surely you cannot be serious. The creature killed 2 prey animals in moments. Mr. Chen may be from a dangerous world, but he is still just a student." Marcus appreciated the concern from the Zephyrian, even though her species' concept of danger was quite different from his own. On her world, the most threatening situation most individuals faced was deciding between different flavors of nectar for breakfast. Liseth, however, seemed pleased by the proposal. "Yes, let the primitive demonstrate his theories. Perhaps this will teach him proper respect for galactic apex predators." The Altarian's smugness annoyed Marcus more than the obvious danger. His species had spent generations believing they were the galaxy's greatest strategic minds, largely because they had never encountered serious opposition. Their homeworld's predators were hive-minded insects that attacked in predictable swarms, dangerous in numbers but lacking individual cunning. "I did not suggest putting Mr. Chen in immediate danger," Professor Vexhai clarified, though his tone suggested he was considering exactly that. However, a controlled demonstration might prove educational for all involved. Marcus stood and walked toward the front of the lecture hall, ignoring the whispers that followed his movement. Up close, the containment chamber looked even more impressive. The transparent aluminum walls were thick enough to stop heavy weapons fire, and the electromagnetic barriers hummed with barely contained energy. "What exactly are you proposing, Professor?" Marcus asked, studying the habitat where the Shadow Stalker continued its deadly game with the remaining prey animals. "A modified scenario," the insectoid educator replied, his mandibles clicking in what Marcus had learned was a sign of excitement. "We could introduce you to a separate chamber, connected to the main habitat by a controlled passage. You would have defensive tools and the ability to retreat if necessary." "What kind of defensive tools?" Marcus asked practically. He had learned that different species had very different definitions of adequate protection. "Standard galactic survival equipment," Professor Vexhai replied. "Energy barriers, sonic disruptors, emergency beacon." Marcus almost laughed. The equipment list sounded like what most galactic species considered military-grade protection, but to him it seemed like showing up to a gunfight with a water pistol. Still, the challenge intrigued him, and he was getting tired of being treated like a curiosity from a backwards world. "All right," he said simply. "Let's do it." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Half the class erupted in what sounded like protests in a dozen different languages. The other half seemed torn between excitement and horror at the prospect of watching a fellow student potentially become an alien creature's lunch. Torgan, the massive Corvin, rumbled something that the translation device rendered as, "The human shows courage, but courage and foolishness often wear the same face." "This is madness," declared Dr. Kickstal, a Mentari professor who had been observing the class. Her species prided itself on logic and careful analysis. "Mr. Chen, you have been at the academy for only 3 months. You cannot possibly understand the full danger you are accepting." Marcus turned to face the assembled faculty and students. "With respect, Dr. Kickstal, you've been studying galactic predators for decades, but how many have you actually faced?" "I've been dealing with predators since I was old enough to walk." "Earth predators," Liseth interjected dismissively. "Primitive beasts driven by simple hunger. The Shadow Stalker is intelligent, adaptive. It learns from each encounter." "So do I," Marcus replied quietly, and something in his tone made several students shift uncomfortably. Professor Vexhai began preparing the modified demonstration with obvious enthusiasm. Additional safety measures were put in place, including a rapid extraction system that could teleport Marcus to safety within seconds. Medical teams were alerted, and the Academy's best xenobiologists were brought in to monitor the situation. As the preparations continued, Marcus found himself approached by Linara. The Zephyrian's large violet eyes showed genuine concern. "Mr. Chen, I do not understand your world's customs. Is this normal behavior for humans?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Not exactly normal, but not unprecedented either. My species has always been curious about dangerous things. It's how we learn to survive them." "But why take such risks for a classroom demonstration?" "Because," Marcus said, watching the Shadow Stalker eliminate the third prey animal with surgical precision. "Sometimes the only way to prove a point is to demonstrate it practically. Besides, I'm not going in there unprepared." During the setup period, Marcus had been studying the creature's behavior patterns intensively. The Shadow Stalker was indeed intelligent and adaptive, but it followed certain biological imperatives that created predictable behaviors. It preferred to attack from elevated positions. It waited for prey to enter specific zones before striking. Most importantly, it had never encountered prey that actively hunted it back. The equipment provided by the Academy was more sophisticated than Marcus had initially realized. The sonic disruptor could disorient the creature's sensory organs. The energy barriers could provide temporary protection. The emergency beacon would summon help within seconds. More importantly, Marcus had requested and received permission to bring one item from his personal effects, a simple camping knife that had belonged to his grandfather. The Academy's safety officers had been puzzled by the request, unable to understand why he would want such a primitive weapon when advanced technology was available. Marcus hadn't bothered explaining that the knife wasn't really a weapon, it was a psychological anchor. Throughout human history, warriors had carried talismans and familiar tools into battle not for their practical value, but for the confidence they provided. As the final preparations were completed, the excitement in the lecture hall was palpable. Word had spread throughout the Academy, and additional students and faculty had arrived to witness the unprecedented demonstration. The viewing area was now packed with representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had never seen a human before, let alone one about to face a galactic apex predator. "Mr. Chen," Professor Vexhai announced, "the demonstration chamber is prepared. Are you certain you wish to proceed?" Marcus checked his equipment one final time and nodded. "Let's see what this thing can really do." As he approached the chamber entrance, he heard Torgan rumble to a nearby student. "Either we are about to witness remarkable courage, or we will learn why Deathworlders do not typically survive long enough to join galactic civilization." Marcus smiled grimly. He was about to show them exactly why humans had not only survived their death world, but thrived on it. The demonstration chamber sealed behind Marcus with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. The artificial environment was larger than it had appeared from the lecture hall. roughly the size of a basketball court, with varied terrain that included rocky outcroppings, dense vegetation, and several elevated platforms. The lighting was designed to mimic the twilight conditions of Kethmore Prime, creating deep shadows and misleading contrasts. Marcus stood at the chamber's center, deliberately making himself visible while his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting. From the observation area, he could hear the muffled voices of hundreds of students and faculty, their excitement and apprehension creating a constant background buzz. "Mr. Chen?" Professor Vexhi's voice came through the communication system. "The connecting passage will open in 30 seconds. The Shadow Stalker is currently positioned in the eastern section of the main habitat. Are you prepared?" "Ready?" Marcus replied, though he spent those 30 seconds doing something that probably confused his observers. He closed his eyes and simply listened. The artificial environment wasn't silent. Air circulation systems created subtle currents. The holographic vegetation rustled softly. Small speakers provided ambient sounds of the creature's homeworld. But underneath it all, Marcus could detect something else. The almost imperceptible sound of controlled breathing from a large predator trying to remain motionless. The passage opened with a low rumble of machinery. Marcus opened his eyes and moved forward deliberately, not trying to hide his approach. This was the part that would confuse the Shadow Stalker. Prey animals tried to avoid detection, not announce their presence. As he entered the main habitat, Marcus heard several sharp intakes of breath from the observation area. The chamber's internal sensors would be tracking his vital signs, probably showing elevated heart rate and adrenaline levels that his observers would interpret as fear. They would be wrong. Marcus felt the familiar rush of heightened awareness that came with dangerous situations, but fear wasn't part of the equation. "Fascinating," Dr. Kickstall's voice carried through the communication system. "The human's biometric readings suggest he is experiencing significant stress, yet his movement patterns remain controlled and purposeful." Marcus ignored the commentary and focused on his environment. The Shadow Stalker was somewhere in this space, probably already studying him and planning its attack. Most prey animals would be frantically searching for the threat or trying to escape. Instead, Marcus found a position with good visibility and sat down. The action apparently shocked his observers into silence. Sitting down in a predator's territory was either the behavior of something too stupid to recognize danger, or something confident in its ability to handle whatever came next. For several minutes, nothing happened. Marcus remained seated, occasionally turning his head to scan different sections of the habitat but showing no signs of panic or urgency. His grandfather had taught him this technique during their hunting trips. Sometimes the best way to spot a hidden predator was to make yourself look like easy prey and wait for it to reveal itself. "Why is he not moving?" Linara whispered loudly enough for the communication system to pick up her voice. The creature could attack at any moment. "He's hunting," Torgan rumbled in response, his granite features showing what might have been respect. "The human is not acting like prey. He is acting like a competing predator." The Corvin's observation was more accurate than he knew. Marcus was indeed hunting, using techniques that no galactic species had developed because none of them had evolved on worlds where becoming the hunter was often the only alternative to becoming the meal. The Shadow Stalker's first probe came as expected, a subtle movement in Marcus's peripheral vision, designed to test his awareness and reaction speed. Most prey animals would have startled or fled. Marcus simply turned his head slowly toward the movement and smiled. The expression apparently unnerved the creature because it retreated immediately. The audience was confused by the exchange, but Marcus understood the psychology perfectly. Predators expected prey to show fear. Confidence was a warning sign that suggested the potential meal might be more dangerous than anticipated. "Remarkable," Professor Vexhi commented. "The Shadow Stalker appears to be hesitating. This behavior has never been documented." Marcus stood up slowly and began walking toward the section where he had detected the probe. His movement was deliberate and controlled, showing none of the quick, nervous motions that characterized fleeing prey. Instead, he moved like something that owned its territory and wasn't particularly concerned about visitors. The second probe came from behind, a classic predator tactic. Something brushed against Marcus's hair, probably a claw designed to test his reflexes. Again, instead of spinning around in panic, Marcus simply stopped walking and spoke aloud. "I know you're there," he said conversationally, "and I know you're trying to figure out what I am. The problem is you've never encountered anything like me before. The observation area erupted in whispers and exclamations. Liseth's voice cut through the noise. He speaks to it as if it were intelligent conversation partner, rather than a killing machine. It is intelligent, Marcus replied, apparently able to hear the commentary. That's exactly why this is working. Intelligence requires information to function properly, and right now, it doesn't have enough data to categorize me as either prey or threat. To demonstrate his point, Marcus did something that caused several observers to cry out in alarm. He sat down again, but this time with his back to where he had detected the creature's presence. This is insane, Dr. Kickstall declared. He is presenting the creature with the perfect opportunity for a killing strike. No, Marcus said calmly. I'm presenting it with a puzzle it can't solve. Prey animals don't expose their backs to predators. Other predators don't show submission. So what am I? The answer came as a soft sound of displaced air. The shadow stalker had moved closer, probably trying to get a better sensory reading on this strange creature that refused to behave according to any known pattern. Marcus could feel its presence now, perhaps 3 meters behind him. The creature was struggling with a fundamental contradiction. Every instinct told it to attack the exposed prey, but every evolved survival mechanism warned that something displaying such confidence might be dangerous. The human appears to be conducting some form of psychological warfare, observed a faculty member Marcus didn't recognize. But against a creature that operates on instinct, surely such tactics would be ineffective. You're assuming it operates purely on instinct, Marcus replied. But intelligent predators learn from experience. Right now it's trying to fit me into its database of known threats and prey animals. The problem is I don't fit anywhere. To prove his point, Marcus slowly reached into his equipment pack and withdrew his grandfather's camping knife. The blade was only 6 inches long and made of simple steel. Primitive by galactic standards, but the action of drawing a weapon sent a clear message. The Shadow Stalker's response was immediate and telling. It retreated several meters. An unintelligent predator would have either attacked immediately or ignored the small blade entirely. The creature's retreat proved it was capable of recognizing potential threats and adjusting its behavior accordingly. Now we're communicating, Marcus said softly, still not turning around. You're beginning to understand that I might not be prey after all. Marcus finally turned around to face the Shadow Stalker, moving with the same deliberate calm he had maintained throughout the encounter. The creature was now visible, not because its camouflage had failed, but because it had chosen to reveal itself. The psychological dynamic had shifted completely. The Shadow Stalker stood about 4 meters away, its 6 limbs positioned for either attack or retreat. Up close, it was even more impressive than the holographic representation had suggested. Each of its razor-sharp claws was as long as Marcus's hand, and its black hide seemed to absorb the chamber's lighting. But most importantly, its intelligent eyes were focused entirely on him, studying his every movement. Incredible, whispered Professor Vexhai. In over 200 documented encounters, the Shadow Stalker has never voluntarily revealed itself to potential prey. This behavior is unprecedented. Marcus smiled, the expression causing the creature to shift slightly backward. That's because it's no longer treating me as prey. It's trying to decide if I'm a threat or a competitor. The standoff continued for several long moments with neither human nor alien predator making aggressive moves. The observation area had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of beings watching an interaction that defied everything they understood about predator-prey relationships. Liseth broke the silence with obvious frustration. Nothing is happening. The creature should have attacked by now, or the human should have fled. This proves nothing. On the contrary, Marcus replied without taking his eyes off the Shadow Stalker. This proves everything. Watch what happens when I change the dynamic. Without warning, Marcus took 3 quick steps forward. The sudden movement triggered an immediate response from the Shadow Stalker. It reared back on its hind limbs, claws extended, ready to strike. But instead of continuing the attack, it held the position, waiting to see what the human would do next. Defensive posture, observed Torgan. The creature is preparing to defend itself rather than hunt. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. I've successfully reversed the predator-prey relationship. It's no longer hunting me. It's worried that I might be hunting it. To demonstrate the point further, Marcus began moving in a wide circle around the creature, maintaining constant eye contact. This was a classic dominance behavior used by Earth predators to establish territorial control. The Shadow Stalker responded by rotating to keep Marcus in sight, but it made no attempt to attack or escape. "This is remarkable," Dr. Kickstall admitted grudgingly. "The human has essentially neutralized a galactic apex predator using nothing but behavioral psychology." "Not neutralized," Marcus corrected. "Communicated with. This creature isn't mindless. It's intelligent enough to recognize that I represent something outside its normal experience. Right now, we're both gathering information." The Shadow Stalker suddenly made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that the chamber's sensors had never recorded before. Several students gasped in surprise, but Marcus nodded as if he had expected it. "It's trying to communicate," he explained. "Intelligent predators often use vocalizations to establish dominance or negotiate territorial boundaries." Marcus responded with a sound of his own, a low growl that seemed to come from deep in his chest. It was a sound no human throat should have been able to produce, but growing up in the Australian wilderness had taught Marcus to mimic the vocalizations of various predators. The effect on his observers was electric. Several of the more delicate species made sounds of alarm, while others leaned forward in fascination. The Shadow Stalker's response was even more dramatic. It lowered its aggressive posture and tilted its head in what appeared to be curiosity. "The human just spoke to it," Linara whispered in amazement. "How is that possible?" "Convergent evolution," Marcus explained, still maintaining eye contact with the creature. Predators across different worlds often develop similar communication methods because they serve similar purposes: territorial negotiation, dominance establishment, threat assessment. The Shadow Stalker made another vocalization, this one higher in pitch and shorter in duration. Marcus listened carefully, then responded with a series of clicks in low tones. The conversation, for that's what it had become, continued for several minutes while the academic audience watched in stunned silence. "What are you discussing?" Professor Vexhai finally asked, his scientific curiosity overcoming his amazement. "Territory and intent," Marcus replied. "I'm explaining that I'm not competing for its hunting grounds, and it's acknowledging that I'm not prey. We're essentially agreeing to coexist without conflict." Liseth's voice carried obvious disbelief. "You expect us to believe that you can negotiate with an apex predator using primitive sound-making?" Marcus turned to look directly at the Altarian, breaking eye contact with the Shadow Stalker for the first time since the encounter began. "Your species has spent so long believing you're the galaxy's greatest tacticians that you've forgotten the most basic principle of warfare: understanding your enemy." The Shadow Stalker used Marcus's momentary distraction to move closer, but instead of attacking, it simply positioned itself where it could observe both the human and the observation area. The creature's intelligent eyes seemed to be studying the assembled students and faculty with the same intensity it had previously focused on Marcus. "It's curious about the rest of you now," Marcus observed, wondering what other surprises this situation might contain. Dr. Kickstall leaned forward in her seat. "Mr. Chen, what would happen if you were to leave the chamber now? Would the creature revert to its previous hunting behavior?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Possibly, but probably not immediately. I've introduced a new variable into its understanding of potential prey. It will need time to process this information and adjust its hunting strategies accordingly." To test the theory, Marcus began walking toward the exit passage, moving slowly, but without fear. The Shadow Stalker followed at a distance, clearly reluctant to let this fascinating new creature leave its territory. When Marcus reached the passage entrance, he turned back for one final exchange. The creature had moved to within 2 meters, close enough to attack if it chose, but showing no aggressive intent. Marcus nodded respectfully and made a final vocalization, a complex sound that seemed to convey both acknowledgement and farewell. The Shadow Stalker responded with its own farewell call, then settled into a resting position near the center of the habitat. The encounter was over, and both participants had survived it unchanged, something that had never happened in the creature's documented history. As Marcus stepped through the passage and back into the observation area, the assembled crowd erupted in excited chatter. Some voices expressed amazement, others disbelief, and a few showed what sounded like fear. "That," declared Torgan in his rumbling voice, "was either the most impressive display of interspecies communication I have ever witnessed, or the most elaborate deception ever attempted." Marcus smiled as he began removing his equipment. I suppose that depends on whether you believe intelligence and communication are limited to your own species and their allies. The demonstration had ended, but Marcus suspected the real education was just beginning. The academic aftermath of Marcus's demonstration spread through the Galactic Academy like wildfire. Within hours, recordings of the encounter were being analyzed by xenobiologists, behavioral psychologists, and military strategists across known space. The idea that a single individual could neutralize an apex predator through psychological manipulation rather than superior firepower challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies conflict resolution. Professor Vexhai found himself fielding calls from research institutions throughout the galaxy, all requesting detailed data about the humans' techniques. The Shadow Stalker itself had become a subject of renewed interest, as its behavior during and after the encounter suggested cognitive capabilities far beyond what previous studies had indicated. The creature's stress hormones actually decreased during the interaction, Dr. Kickstall reported during an emergency faculty meeting 3 days later. This contradicts everything we know about predator psychology. Encounters with potential threats should trigger fight-or-flight responses, not whatever this was. Marcus sat in the back of the faculty conference room, officially present as the subject of discussion but quietly amused by the academic chaos his simple demonstration had created. Most of the professors were struggling to fit what they had witnessed into existing theoretical frameworks, like trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from the wrong box. Perhaps, suggested Dr. Yilneth, a renowned expert in interspecies communication, we should consider the possibility that Mr. Chen's approach represents a completely new paradigm for understanding predator behavior. Liseth, who had been notably quiet since the demonstration, finally spoke up. Or perhaps we are overcomplicating a simple situation. The human got lucky. The creature was confused by encountering something outside its normal experience. This proves nothing about reproducible techniques. Would you care to test that theory? Marcus asked mildly. The Altarian's 4 eyes fixed on the human with obvious hostility. What do you mean? Well, if it was just luck and confusion, then the technique shouldn't work with other predators. The Academy has several dangerous species in its research facilities. We could run additional tests. The suggestion created an immediate stir among the faculty. Professor Vexhai's compound eyes glittered with scientific enthusiasm, while Dr. Kickstall looked distinctly uncomfortable with the idea of exposing a student to additional risks. Mr. Chen, she said carefully, while your demonstration was certainly educational, I hardly think it wise to repeat such dangerous experiments. Why not? Marcus asked. If my techniques work with other species, then we've discovered something genuinely useful. If they don't work, then Professor Liseth is correct, and we can all go back to assuming that superior firepower is the only way to deal with dangerous predators. Torgan shifted his massive form, the sound like rocks grinding together. The human raises an interesting point. My people have dealt with the crystal wasps of Kethtar for generations. These creatures are immune to most conventional weapons and show no fear of death. If his techniques could work with them, the suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. The crystal wasps were legendary throughout the galaxy, as one of the few species that had successfully resisted all attempts at pacification or control. They were intelligent, aggressive, and absolutely fearless in combat. The crystal wasps have killed hundreds of Corvan warriors, Dr. Kickstall pointed out. They show no mercy and accept no quarter. Suggesting that a human could communicate with them is impossible, Marcus finished. That's what everyone said about the Shadow Stalker. Liseth leaned forward, his species equivalent of a predatory smile playing across his features. Very well, human. If you are so confident in your primitive techniques, demonstrate them with the crystal wasps. When you fail, perhaps we can end this foolish speculation about Deathworlder superiority. Liseth, Professor Vexhai warned, the crystal wasps are significantly more dangerous than the Shadow Stalker. They attack in coordinated groups and show no hesitation about killing perceived threats. Which is exactly why they would be the perfect test, Marcus replied. If my techniques only work with solitary predators who rely on stealth and intimidation, then they have limited practical value. But if they work with pack hunters who use direct aggression... He left the sentence unfinished, but the implications were clear. A technique that could neutralize coordinated predator attacks would revolutionize everything from planetary colonization to military tactics. Dr. Yilneth spoke up hesitantly. The crystal wasps are currently housed in Research Facility 7. The containment protocols are extensive, because they've killed everyone who has tried to study them up close. Torgon rumbled. My grandfather was part of the last expedition to their homeworld. Only he survived, and he spent the rest of his life warning others never to underestimate their tactical capabilities. Marcus nodded respectfully. I'd like to hear those warnings if you're willing to share them. Understanding their previous tactics will help me prepare. The massive Corvin studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking. My grandfather said they fought like a single organism with multiple bodies. No wasted movement, no hesitation, perfect coordination. They anticipated his unit's tactics before the attacks were even launched. Hive mind? Marcus asked. No, Torgon replied. Individual intelligence, but shared purpose. Each wasp could think independently, but they worked together as if they had trained for centuries. My grandfather said it was like fighting an army that knew all your secrets. Professor Vexhai began accessing files on his datapad. The crystal wasps measure approximately 1 meter in length, with crystalline exoskeletons that deflect most energy weapons. They possess flight capability, venom that induces paralysis, and mandibles capable of cutting through standard armor plating. How many are currently in containment? Marcus asked. 3 specimens, Dr. Kickstall replied reluctantly. They were captured during a scientific expedition 5 years ago, but all attempts at behavioral study have failed. They attack anything that enters their containment area. Have they been isolated from each other since capture? The question seemed to surprise several faculty members. Professor Vexhai checked his files. Yes, they are housed in separate chambers. Standard protocol for dangerous specimens. Marcus frowned. That might be part of the problem. If they're naturally cooperative hunters, isolation could be causing psychological stress that makes them more aggressive than normal. Liseth made a sound that his species used to express contempt. The humans suggest we should house them together to make them calmer. This demonstrates exactly the kind of Deathworlder thinking that will get him killed. Actually, Marcus replied calmly, it demonstrates the kind of thinking that might save lives. Stressed, isolated predators are unpredictable and desperate. Predators in their natural social groups are more likely to follow established behavioral patterns. Dr. Yilneth looked intrigued, despite her obvious concern. You believe that reuniting the specimens might make them more manageable? I believe it might make them more predictable, Marcus corrected, which is the first step toward communication. The debate continued for another hour, with faculty members arguing about safety protocols, research ethics, and the potential value of the proposed experiment. Eventually, Professor Vexhai called for a formal vote on whether to proceed with the crystal wasp demonstration. The result was closer than Marcus had expected. 7 votes in favor, 5 opposed, with 3 abstentions. Dr. Kickstall had ultimately voted in favor, explaining that the potential scientific value outweighed her personal concerns about student safety. However, she added firmly, if we proceed with this experiment, the safety protocols will be absolute. Mr. Chen will have immediate extraction capabilities, multiple layers of protective barriers, and a full medical team standing by. Agreed, Marcus replied. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, Professor Vexhai announced. That will give us time to prepare the facility and brief the research team. As the meeting broke up, Torgan approached Marcus. Human, I respect your courage, but I hope you understand the magnitude of what you are attempting. The crystal wasps are not merely dangerous. They are perfectly designed killing machines. So were the creatures that taught my species to survive, Marcus replied. The difference is we learn to think like they do. Leonera appeared at his side, her musical voice carrying obvious worry. Mr. Chen, I have been researching your homeworld since your demonstration with the Shadowstalker. The predators of Earth are indeed formidable, but the crystal wasps have capabilities that your planet's creatures lack. Such as? Flight, for one. Coordinated pack tactics. Venom that can incapacitate targets in seconds. Your Earth predators may be dangerous, but they are still bound by the limitations of a single world's evolution. Marcus smiled, appreciating her concern but not sharing her pessimism. That's true, but Earth's predators also taught my species something that galactic civilization seems to have forgotten. Which is? Sometimes the best way to survive a fight is to make sure it never becomes a fight in the first place. The next morning would test whether that philosophy could work against creatures that the galaxy considered unstoppable. Research Facility 7 buzzed with nervous energy as teams of scientists, security personnel, and medical staff prepared for what many considered the most dangerous experiment in the Academy's history. The Crystal Wasp containment area had been modified overnight, with the 3 separate chambers now connected by controllable passages that would allow the specimens to reunite for the first time in 5 years. Marcus stood before the observation deck, looking down at the modified containment system. The wasps themselves were more impressive than the holographic records had suggested. Each creature was indeed about a meter long, with crystalline exoskeletons that refracted the chamber lighting into rainbow patterns. Their wings were folded against their bodies, but he could see the powerful flight muscles that would give them 3-dimensional mobility in combat. "Final systems check complete," announced Chief Security Officer Zaltex, a grizzled veteran whose cybernetic implants suggested extensive combat experience. "Mr. Chen, I want to emphasize that these creatures have killed or seriously injured every individual who has entered their space. The extraction protocols will activate automatically if your vital signs indicate distress." "Understood," Marcus replied, though privately he wondered if automatic extraction might actually make the situation more dangerous. Sudden movements and disappearing threats could trigger pursuit instincts in pack hunters. Professor Vexhai addressed the assembled observers. "We will begin by reuniting the 3 specimens. Mr. Chen believes this will reduce their stress levels and make their behavior more predictable." Dr. Kickstal activated the first connecting passage. The response was immediate and dramatic. The nearest crystal wasp moved toward the opening with fluid grace, its crystalline body catching and reflecting light as it rejoined its companions. The reunification process took less than 30 seconds, and the change in their behavior was visible even from the observation deck. "Their stress indicators are dropping significantly," reported Dr. Yilneth, monitoring the biometric sensors. "Heart rate, hormone levels, neural activity, all showing marked reduction in agitation." The 3 wasps moved together in a complex pattern that seemed part greeting ritual and part tactical assessment. Their movements were perfectly synchronized, confirming Torgan's grandfather's description of their coordination abilities. "Remarkable," murmured a faculty member Marcus didn't recognize. "They're actually communicating through movement patterns. Look how the lead specimen is directing the others to specific positions." Marcus watched the display with growing understanding. The wasps weren't just reuniting. They were establishing a defensive formation that would allow them to protect each other while maintaining visibility of all potential threats. It was sophisticated pack behavior that demonstrated both intelligence and emotional attachment. "They're ready for me now," Marcus announced. Liseth's voice carried obvious skepticism. "How can you possibly know that?" "Because they've stopped looking for escape routes and started assessing threats," Marcus explained. "Watch their wing positions. They're not preparing to flee, they're preparing to fight or negotiate." The entrance to the containment area opened with a soft mechanical hum. Marcus stepped through carrying minimal equipment. No weapons, no energy barriers, just his grandfather's knife and a small audio recorder that would document any vocalizations. The wasp's reaction was immediate but controlled. All 3 creatures oriented toward him, their crystalline forms shifting to catch and reflect the chamber lighting. But instead of attacking, they held their positions and waited. "They're studying me," Marcus observed aloud for the benefit of the recording equipment, "trying to determine threat level and intent." He moved slowly toward the center of the chamber, making no sudden gestures or aggressive movements. The wasps tracked his progress but maintained their defensive formation. When he reached a position roughly equidistant from all 3 creatures, Marcus stopped and sat down. The action confused his observers but had a clear effect on the wasps. The lead specimen, distinguishable by slightly larger size and more elaborate crystalline formations, moved closer, while the other 2 maintained overwatch positions. "Incredible," Dr. Kickstal whispered. "They're treating him as a potential diplomatic contact rather than prey or threat." Marcus began speaking in low, measured tones. Not words, but sounds that mimicked the rhythmic patterns he had observed in their movement communications. The lead wasp responded immediately, its crystalline body producing a series of harmonic vibrations that filled the chamber with complex musical tones. "They're singing to each other," Lin-Ara breathed in amazement. The conversation continued for several minutes, with Marcus and the lead wasp exchanging increasingly complex harmonic patterns, while the other two wasps maintained their positions. Gradually, the defensive formation relaxed as the creatures apparently concluded that this strange bipedal visitor posed no immediate threat. "Mr. Chen," Professor Vexhai's voice came through the communication system. "Can you explain what is happening?" "Cultural exchange," Marcus replied without breaking his harmonic dialogue with the wasps. "They use harmonic vibrations to convey complex information, emotional states, territorial boundaries, social hierarchies. I'm trying to establish peaceful intent and mutual respect." The lead wasp suddenly took flight, its crystalline wings creating a dazzling light show as it circled overhead. But instead of attacking, it was performing what could only be described as an aerial dance, with complex maneuvers that seemed designed to display its capabilities without threatening the human below. Marcus responded by standing and performing a simplified version of a traditional Maori haka, not the aggressive war dance that most people knew, but the peaceful ceremonial version used to welcome honored guests. The powerful movements and rhythmic vocalizations seemed to fascinate the wasps, who gathered closer to observe this alien display. "He's performing some kind of ritual," Torgan rumbled approvingly, "showing strength without aggression, capability without threat." The cultural exchange continued for another 20 minutes, with each species demonstrating their abilities and acknowledging the capabilities of the other. By the end, all three wasps had participated in the harmonic conversations, and Marcus had established what appeared to be a functioning communication protocol. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Yilnith declared. "We're witnessing the first successful peaceful contact with crystal wasps in recorded history." As Marcus prepared to leave the chamber, the lead wasp approached and performed a final harmonic sequence that seemed clearly designed as a farewell. Marcus responded with his own farewell pattern, and the creature actually bobbed its head in what appeared to be acknowledgement. When Marcus emerged from the containment area, the observation deck erupted in excited chatter from dozens of species. Even Liseth appeared stunned by what he had witnessed. "How?" the Altarian demanded. "How is this possible?" Marcus smiled as he began documenting his observations. "Because I treated them like intelligent beings instead of mindless monsters. Every species in this galaxy has forgotten the most important principle of first contact, respect, and communication can achieve what force never could." "Professor," Vexhai was already planning follow-up studies. "Mr. Chen, would you be willing to work with our xenolinguistics department to develop formal communication protocols based on your discoveries?" "Absolutely," Marcus replied. "But I think we should also consider something else. If harmonic communication works with crystal wasps, what other hostile species might simply be misunderstood?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything galactic civilization thought it knew about interspecies relations. Marcus had not only survived encounters with two apex predators, he had opened the door to an entirely new understanding of intelligence and communication across species barriers. As news of the demonstration spread throughout the galaxy, one thing became clear. The human from the death world called Earth had taught the galaxy's most advanced civilizations that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was also the most simple. Treat others with the respect and intelligence they deserve, and they might just surprise you with their response. The age of assuming that different meant hostile was coming to an end, replaced by the revolutionary idea that intelligence came in many forms, and communication was always possible between thinking beings willing to make the effort to understand each other.